Good morning, everybody. I hope you guys are all doing well. I was pretty disappointed that I couldn't be with you guys this morning, but I wanted to still be able to continue with where we've been in our devotions for the last few weeks. I didn't want to miss just because I wouldn't be able to be there. So, um, let's start with a quick review of where we've been. So, if you guys remember at the beginning of the season, we started out talking about John the Baptist. Um, we talked about how God used him to prepare a way for the coming of Jesus, right? And we talked about when Jesus came and he went through temptation, and we talked about how um, Jesus was given a specific purpose, right? He was given, um, he, he started his ministry, and on his ministry, he focused on two main things. We talked about his teaching, we talked about his service. If you guys remember, we talked about um, with his teaching, we talked about like the different stories he'd tell. We talked about how he'd use parables, which are stories with a purpose, to give people practical insight into uh, difficult to understand concepts. Right? We talked about the parable of the sower and the seeds, and then we also talked about his service, right? To the miracles he did. We talked about how he would heal people who were blind or who couldn't walk, or even when he cast out demons um, from the man. The whole point of talking about those things was to show, um, first of all, Jesus' power, that Jesus was different, right? He wasn't just a normal guy. There was something different about him. He had a purpose, right? And also to show how um, not just how he was different in what he did, but in what he taught. Remember, we talked last time about the Pharisees, the religious leaders in Israel, and how um, they had become kind of self-absorbed. They, rather than focusing on God's teaching, God's word, they became very obsessed with um, following the law perfectly and doing everything the exact right way, and trying to give themselves as much credit and attention as they could for doing those things right. Remember, we talked about how um, the more of Jesus' teaching that they witnessed and watched and saw, the angrier and angrier they became with Jesus, to the point where they knew that the only way that people would start listening to them again is if Jesus was out of the picture. So, so as the Pharisees began to think and plot how they were going to get rid of Jesus, one man kind of stood out. And this was a man named Judas Iscariot. Now, Judas wasn't just um, any random person in Israel at the time. He wasn't even a Pharisee. Rather, Judas was a follower of Jesus. He was one of Jesus' closest friends, called the 12 disciples, right? Went with Jesus everywhere. Um, was constantly learning from him, witnessing his miracles, witnessing his teaching. Um, but the more Judas saw of what Jesus did, the more discontent he became. You see, among other things, Judas was in charge of keeping the money. It was his job to make sure that um, all of the money that the 12 disciples had was kept safe and was used well. However, that was a responsibility that he often took advantage of, um, more to his own gain than anything else. And it was in one situation where um, Jesus and his disciples were dining with a man named Simon in the town of Bethany, uh, that Judas became very discontent with how Jesus did things. You see, during that dinner, a woman named Mary Magdalene, someone who had uh, been possessed by demons and been tormented for years, who Jesus had healed, she came in and without saying anything, bowed down at Jesus' feet, took an expensive um, jar of oil, broke it, poured it on Jesus' feet, and began to wash uh, his feet with her hair and with the expensive oil. Now, I know that sounds a little weird, but at the time it was customary to um, wash the feet of your guest when they enter your home, which is something that the homeowner hadn't done at this time. Um, but Mary took it upon herself to take the most expensive thing she had and to use it to honor Jesus. Well, Judas' first thought was, well, why did she waste that oil? We could have sold it. We could have given the money to the poor. But the truth is, Judas didn't care about that. He wanted the money to go into the treasury so he could take part of it and use it for himself. It was at that moment that Judas realized that his goal, his vision of self-pleasure and providing the things that he wanted in life didn't match up with what Jesus had in mind. And as the Pharisees began to watch and notice this growing discontentment in Judas, it was only a matter of time until Judas and the Pharisees met in person. The Pharisees mentioned to Judas how they have been trying to get to Jesus for a long time, how if they could just arrest him and put him on trial, then many of these things that he's doing that they saw as so wrong could finally be taken care of. Well, Judas saw this as an opportunity to finally get some of the money that he desperately wanted. And he told the Pharisees, well, if you give me 30 shekels of silver, I'll hand Jesus over to you. And that's where we will leave it until next week.